say a little midweek video chat session, little nerd out a little bit maybe. I put up a post on YouTube a little while back, a couple weeks ago, whatever, asking for video ideas, and it could be something that would take 5 minutes to cover or an hour to cover, whatever. With the bike being like raceable right now, not a lot of wrenching going on other than what you've seen me do 100 times after I run the bike. I go through the clutch, I dump the oil, go through the plugs, do a leak down compression test, like all the post-race maintenance stuff. I will keep posting that if you want and show you like the different things I find, but realistically, like the oil's clean, the leak down is good, plugs look good, like not a lot of carnage or nothing going on here. I'm just happy the bike's back together and running, so we're kind of just rolling with it. There's things I want to change, and I'll do another video update on that about like, maybe like over the winter plans or just things I want to upgrade and do different yet. As you know, these things are never done. They're never exactly how you want them. It's pretty close. I'm pretty happy with how this thing is, but there's still little things I want to change, and it's taken this long to get it where it is because of money. Like I'm not sponsored, not factory ride. No one's giving me parts, and it takes me extra long because of life to save up and buy a part here and there. So there's still things I want to do because I just haven't gotten to that point yet. So this build will always probably be, a couple of years behind what the big dogs have, and I'll never be at that level just for, maintenance reasons. Like there's no point in me building a bike that would run like what the Pro Street guys are running because I don't have a place to do that. So we're just going to keep going with our little toy that we got here and going as fast as we can make it go with what we got available. But in that post I put up about asking questions, one of them that I got was about like a shock setup. I guess it would be like a general like suspension setup. I've talked a little bit about that in the past, but never really talked about what I do different. Because like we've run like I would venture to say that this region was if not the first to start running no prep bikes way back in the days of when COTS first started, like early days. So majority of what we've done in this area has been no prep. Granted, we would get a good track prep here and there, or during some of the races the track gets really good where it's almost like a prepped event. But as the starting line would improve, down track never really got a whole lot better, so you're still going from prep to no prep. You weren't using all your power you had available, and you had to get creative with stuff. So that's how this bike has always been set up, basically, was to work on a no prep and be kind of okay on a prep. Like if we were testing at the track one day that they were maybe spraying and dragging and keeping up on it, but I never went back and forth with setups. I got it dialed in to work on a no prep and then kind of just dealt with it on a good prep. I'd make a few tweaks, mostly tune or power management. But now that no prep is not as much what we're doing anymore, the prep stuff is starting to take off. And basically since I've had this running with the Hayabusa motor in it now, going from a 1000 that was almost solely no prep to now a Busa powered 1000 that's only seen really good prep now, I was out in left field, like trying to get power down and make this thing work. So I kind of had the little learning curve that I had to go through, and you can do all the reading that you want to do, and you can look up stuff on the internet, on Facebook, whatever. Not a lot of people are willing to share info on what they're doing, or they swear by their way. It has to be what they did works, that's what you need to do. And that's not always the case. These bikes are so different from combo to combo, and track surface to track surface, and power management, nitrous, turbo, all motor, weight of bike, weight of rider. It's almost like infinite possibilities of combinations. So there is no like cut and dried, one setup works for all kind of tune-up. But I think what I can maybe talk about is a little bit of my, like kind of like what I've done with like the MTC, the Gen 2 clutch tuning, just sort of a logical attack breakdown as to what I'm looking for or what I want to get out of the bike in a logical order, like a process that I go through to make it happen without getting in over my head and having stuff just totally out of whack. And that's kind of how this bike was suspension wise going to the prep. I won't say that it was totally out of whack. I just didn't realize going from no prep to really good radial prep the step in adjustments I was going to have to make. I was doing such minute little adjustments and it wasn't quite coming around as fast. And it took me working with the guys that I race with and just asking questions, and we were brainstorming, and you know, it's how this works as a community. You know, we were sitting around and everybody's helping try to make everybody else go faster. And I just realized, talking to the guys that are really fast on the radial prep stuff, what do they look for? Like, what are you watching? Can you help me look at this thing? Sure shit. Within one conversation and 2 adjustments, I'm going high 1 60 foots, like bingo. Couldn't ask for more. But I mentally was there with the adjustments. Like I said, I just wasn't making them in big enough jumps. But I think I'll kind of talk about how the bike was set up and why, and what I changed and why, and see if it makes sense. Like I said, you can tear me to pieces in the comments. I don't care, because I've got it working. I've had it working both ways, and I'm one of these people that I'll make 50 passes looking for that adjustment or that one thing that I finally figured it out. That's what worked. So while I might not know everything, I know what I've done and what has worked. So I'll kind of take it for what it is. I don't want that to sound like I'm being cocky or I don't believe what other people say, but you got to take all this stuff with a grain of salt. It's just an accumulation of knowledge. You got to kind of file it all away and pull little pieces out when you think it might apply. But I'll kind of show you what I have had success with, because this has been consistent. I mean, mid to low 120, 60 foots on the no prep. And that's with an MTC Gen 2, a little bit of power management, and also getting like 7 passes before taking the clutch apart. So there's a lot of things to consider, and like what I do might not be the answer for everybody, but it's something that maybe you can reference in the future. Because we get in these events and sometimes we got 15 minutes between rounds, and I can't be tearing the clutch apart. It's either got to go or blow, and I managed to find a tune-up that the clutch will wear. I mean, I would be losing 7, 8, 10 thou in that evening, but it would live long enough to get me through the event without having to totally tear the thing apart and get rushed and make a mistake. But I'll get kind of going on showing you the bike, the setup here, and just kind of point at a few things and kind of explain my thought process behind this. And hopefully that helps answer some of your setup questions about what I've done differently. So this video is a lot of jibber jabber and jaw jacking, but some of you like that. Like I said, I don't have nothing mechanically to do right now. I'm actually leaving. Let's see, it's Wednesday. Thursday night, I'll have to get stuff packed up. Friday after work, we're leaving. Our next race is this weekend. So the bike is ready to go. I've already got it turned around from the last race. I was going to test this past Friday for Labor Day weekend. Our track was open on Monday for test and tune. I decided I really wanted to enjoy the 3-day weekend, and I did not go testing. So we'll see how the event goes because of that decision. But the bike has been working really good. So this is how it sits now. This is with the Busa motor in it. As it was set up with the 1000 setup in it, with kind of like my no prep setup. And sorry about the marks on my hands. I'm not a crackhead or nothing with welding burns. I refuse to replace my gloves before they're actually trashed, and there's a hole right there. But so as a 1000 in no prep trim, I kind of would eyeball. I'd get a straight edge, but for here we got to kind of eyeball. Front axle, this would be on the ground. Front axle height, center pivot height, rear axle height. And just picture a straight edge between the front and rear axle, and then where that center pivot falls on that center line. When I was running this as a no prep and it was working really good, I had that center pivot roughly a 1/2 inch low from the front and rear axle. 1/2 inch low in the middle. This is with me on the bike, my weight on the bike. And I had the spring set up so that I had about 1.25 inches of sag in the thing. And then I had the compression set up, I would say, relatively soft compared to all of the settings available on there. Ideally, what I was trying to get the chassis to do, and what actually was working, was, and you can watch videos of guys on the internet what they're doing, but 90% of it is they're on a prepped track. But ideally, what I was looking for was getting the bike to actually squat and slowly, using the spring, slowly transfer power into the tire through the swing arm, and obviously using power management to get the thing to launch. But I was trying to not have all the power come in and not transfer and basically hit the tire too hard to where it just wicked the tire up. Because once the tire wicks up, the clutch locks up and it's game over at that point. So I was trying to get the back of the bike basically as soft as possible without bottoming the shock out, to where it also would bottom the shock out and hit the tire too hard and knock the tire off. So there was that fine line I would balance between how much power I was hitting the bike with, how hard it would squat before it would bottom the shock out, but still also using that spring. That spring is stored energy, and it's trying to push the tire down. Your weight is keeping the bike from going up. The spring is trying to push the bike, or push that swing arm into the track. So there's multiple things going on, but that was kind of my theory behind getting this thing to work. Was, like I said, I wanted a real soft leave without that shock bottoming out, kind of letting the bike be the sponge for the power, and then put it in basically as hard as I could in the first, say, 100 feet of the track. Because as most of you know, if you run a no prep, the majority of the time, the starting line will always get better. It's down track that things would struggle. And what I would do to combat that was more so in the clutch and tune-up, but I can get into that later. The whole premise behind my no prep setup was basically what I was saying about. And by the way, this bike is only 70 inches long. This isn't a limo. 70 inches used to be long back in the day when Pro Street bikes were only like 68. 70 was pretty long, but that's where this bike sits. I think I max out at 75 if I go all the way to the back. But yeah, so the bike's only 70 inches long, which does help with a no prep deal. But yeah, that was my concept, was to get that pivot low, to get the bike to basically use the power of. This is another thing. It's kind of a physics phenomenon that takes place. If you have that center pivot lower than the axle points, the chain on the motor is pulled on the top side. If you have that pivot low, you can actually utilize the force of the chain getting pulled forward. If that pivot is low, it'll try to suck the swing arm in. So the bike actually will squat relatively quick if your swing arm is negative. And that actually does kind of help, but the bike will want to stay driven down in the back. And that, like I said, that's so, I'm slurring here, that will slowly and softly apply the power, but you have to keep that shock from bottoming out, but it's got to be soft enough to not strike the tire. So I hope that makes sense. So that's really all there is to it, was making it soft, setting my sag, and then it was power management after that. But not overly complicated. Everybody thinks there's some, mad science stuff going on. That's really it. I keep the stuff brutally simple. But now I think we'll talk a little bit about how that didn't apply anymore for what I was doing for radial prep. So this is the shock setup that's in there. Nothing fancy. It's a double adjustable Penske flat link with an Adams flat link that I repositioned the pivots on that. But now, again, same bike, except now we got about roughly 45 more pounds in the front with the Busa motor to the 1000 motor. And that motor is roughly, at the exhaust flange, it's roughly 1.25 inches farther forward than the 1000 motor. Just the Busa motor is just a bigger motor. So there is more weight farther forward on this thing, which, being as the bike is only 70 inches long, I believe that's really helping it with the radial prep type stuff we're doing. So the bike probably recognizes or identifies itself as a 75-inch bike when it's only 70, because of how much weight is actually a little farther forward now. But I'm going to take a seat on my stool here. Get you a little closer. So now, when I went to do our radial race and the really good track prep stuff that we've been doing now this summer, I was running the bike as it was with my no prep type settings. Center pivot, 1/2 inch low, bunch of sag in it, spring pretty soft. And what was happening is I was trying to leave with more power because the track would take it. Like it wanted to go fast up front. So what was happening, and it took a little bit of a, sorry, I had to readjust. It took a little bit of like recording and looking at data logs, especially my shock data, which I can kind of go into that in another time. But it took a little bit to figure out that the bike was actually, it wasn't bottoming the shock out, but it was basically, it was hydraulically, we'll say, bottoming the shock out against the valving. So it was soft enough to get the bike. It was still squatting a ton. So while it still had a little bit to go before the shock actually would bottom out, it was basically, it was done traveling with the valve set up with where the compression and rebound screws were set at, mostly the compression. It just really wasn't going to compress any farther. But at that point, it had already squatted so far that it was basically, let's switch hands here. It was basically bending at the middle. It would squat and it would wheelie almost simultaneously. The bike would break in the middle and pick the front end up because the back end was coming down so hard, so fast, with so much power coming into it that it would just break and wheelie, and it'd pick the tire up almost without even turning a rotation. It would pick the front end up, and then it would start to climb and basically, ride it up past the 60 foot. And I'm making it sound like I was doing 12 o'clockers, but that's not the deal. I would lift. I'd have to lift actually. But that's what was going on. That's why the track was so good, and I was trying to put in so much more power than I was at the no prep setup, that with prep and more power, it was absolutely just destroying the chassis. The shock didn't stand a chance. It was more or less bottoming out, and then just pounding the tire into the track and just wheeling out of it. So what we ended up doing was putting more spring in the thing. So we basically took my sag from like 1.25 inches down to about 3/4 of an inch with me sitting on it. I'm roughly a 1/2 inch positive. I don't know. In my last segment, I'd have to go back and watch. I don't know if I said when it was a 1/2 inch low. That's negative. I might have said negative. Should be negative. But yeah, if I said positive, I meant negative. But when that's up, that's positive. So this is now roughly with me sitting on it, everything on the ground level, about 3/4 of an inch sag. And then that center pivot is a 1/2 inch up now. And then there's more spring in it. And I cranked a bunch of compression into the thing. Like, you would actually, like, if you were to push down on the tail now, it's almost like you would swear it's too stiff. But after watching a video of this thing going 119 60 foot, it looks like it did on a no prep, the way the tire would, or the way the tail dropped, and it just hooks up and it's gone. The difference being is now this, with that spring setup, with that amount of sag, that compression setting with the valving, the chassis will now take a bunch of power before it'll just keep driving it down before it ever bottoms the shock out and tries to drive into a wheelie. So like I said, that spring is what's putting the pressure downward into the swing arm. That's stored energy in that spring. It's pushing that tire down into the track. So now I can apply a crap ton more power, not bottom the shock out, and get the bike to actually drive forward instead of up. And it's night and day how far off I was with the settings on the compression adjustment. Rebound is a little more forgiving. It's still, you'll have to get it dialed in. But the rebound, with a no prep, I tend to want the rebound a little bit quicker. I want that swing arm to sort of be able to separate again, like a radial car would. I don't want the valving holding it squatted. I want that swing arm to be able to try to, like the spring, to basically try to separate the chassis and push that tire back down. That's what kind of helped down track farther. With something like this, I'm now with this setup for radial prep, I got the compression slowed way down so that the bike, it's not squatting as hard as it was, but the bike will now, it'll it'll drop and just keep digging through that. And as I apply more power, it still has room to drive without bottoming the shock out basically and picking the front end up. So like I said, there's a lot going on because there's so much going on between, you know, weight of me, power delivery, just the whole combo. But this is my plan of attack, and it's been working. So hopefully some of this makes sense. And I've kind of said things, you know, I keep saying the same thing over and over because I'm trying to find different ways for it to make sense. I don't rehearse these video clips, and I don't write down what I'm going to say. So as it comes into my brain, I'm just trying to make my theory clear, come across clear. But yeah, that's kind of how I've attacked now the radial prep setup on a 70-inch bike where everybody's running damn near 80 inches now. But yeah, like I said, I basically just I just stiffened up the whole back half of the bike to let the chassis take all that power and drive that tire in. And also we can get into wheelie control and traction control and all that, but it's for another video. This is just my idiot's guide to what I have, me personally, that builds and tunes and rides the same bike, my personal battles with finding out what works. And it's not always easy to get on the internet and, you know, ask questions and talk to people, because a lot of people don't want to share, or they don't really know. They don't have a theory behind what they have done or changes they've made. They've just turned a bunch of screws and wiggled a bunch of stuff and fiddle with, and they might stumble into something works, or somebody else is doing the work for them. That's hard to get info or trustworthy info from people like that. So, while I may be an idiot, I'm an idiot that somehow figured something out, and I'm giving you my absolute 100% honest opinion as to how I thought this out and what seems to be working. So, like I said, you can look at bikes going down track. You can kind of develop your own theories into what adjustments you should be making or what the bike should be doing. And that's okay. Like, creative minds are what figure this stuff out. So if you got ideas, do it, try it. And if it doesn't work, go 100% the other way. It's the only way we figure out how this stuff works. And that's how we all make each other go faster. So that's kind of the rundown on the suspension deal. So how about that for a bunch of psychobabble bullshit? I'm actually sweating from talking this much. Which shouldn't come as a surprise. Most of my videos I'm babbling about some nonsense. But yeah, like I said, you just got to get out and try some things. I have my theories and ways and things that I want to try. And sometimes I'm completely disproven by myself that I was not thinking correct about that. And sometimes you got to talk to people smarter than yourself. And that's what I did at the last race. The one conversation had me going 100% back in the right direction. But like I said, go ahead and get in the comments and talk about stuff. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, maybe you didn't know some certain things, or maybe I enlightened you on something about how an idiot in a garage tunes his crap. but like I said, you got to get your info from somewhere, and I'm just trying to make it easier to understand how Joe Blow goes about figuring this stuff out, and hopefully it helps the other Joe Blow find his own method of madness to logically break down how this stuff works. So hope you enjoy. We'll do another video on some more questions I got, and yeah, see you in the next one. Hopefully it's a race video.